Welcome back to Python tutorials for complete beginners, from boring people. In this module, we'll learn about loops, and how to get computers to do repetitive tasks. As we've called out before, computers are great at repeating the same task, over and over. They never get bored or make a mistake. You could ask a computer to do the same calculation 1,000 times. And the first result would be just as accurate as the last one. Which is not something we can say about humans. The ability to accurately perform repetitive tasks and never get tired is why computers are so great for automation. The automated task could be anything like copying files to thousands of computers on a network, or sending personalized emails to millions of users. It does not matter how complex the task is. Your computer will do it as many times as you tell it to, which leaves you time for more interesting and creative tasks. In the next few videos, we'll explore 3 techniques for automating repetitive tasks. These are while loops, for loops, and recursion. Each of these techniques are used to tell the computer to repeat a task, but each takes a slightly different approach. We're going to learn how to write the code for each, and how to know when to use one technique instead of the others. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Before that, appreciate your thumbs up to support the channel. First off, we're going to talk about while loops. While loops tell your computer to continuously execute your code, as long as the condition is true. Which is also the reason for its name. In code, a while statement always consists of the while keyword, a condition, which is an expression that evaluates to true or false, a colon. Starting on the next line will be the while clause, which is indented to the right. While loop works in a similar way to the if statements, but it executed multiple times, instead of just once. Check out these examples. For the if statement, after the computer checks that the condition is true, the computer executes the if block one time, and exits the statement. That is why our final result is x equal to 0. But for the while statement, even though we only have one line of print, you can see that the result appears 5 times. Why is that? Let's go through it together line by line. In the first line we are assigning the value of 0 to the variable x. We call this action initializing, which is to give an initial value to a variable. In the line after that, we are starting the statement. We are setting a condition for both statements that the variable x needs to be smaller than 5, for this condition to be true. Right now, we know that x is equal to 0 because we have just initialized it. So this condition is currently true. On the next 2 lines, we have a block that's indented to the right. In the first line, we print the value of x. In the second line, we increment the value of x. We do this by adding 1 to the current value, and assigning it back to x. For the if statement, after the computer checks that the condition is true, it executes the if block one time. And the program will end there. On the other hand, because the while statement is a loop, after the computer checks that the condition is true, it executes the if block but does not end the program there. It will jump back to the beginning of the loop to check the condition again. You can see that, after executing the while block once, x is now equal to 1. And because 1 is still smaller than 5, it executes the body of the loop again. It then prints the message again, and also increments x by 1, so the x is now 2. The computer will keep doing this. Only until the condition is not true anymore. In this example, the condition is false when x is no longer smaller than 5. So when x is equal to 5, the condition is false, and the loop exits. So we end up with 5 lines of the x value, incremented by 1. And the final value that was printed is 4. The reason is because when x was equal to 5, the program exited. This was a simple example of how a while loop behaves. As we've said before, we are learning the building blocks of programming. Once you know those building blocks, you can combine them to create more complex expressions. In practice, while loops can be very helpful, you can use them to keep asking your user for a password, and only granted your users the access when they provide the correct one. Now, let's apply this knowledge to a similar example, but this time with a while loop inside a function. Can you call this function in your computer to see what happens? In this example, we start out by initializing a variable called number of hello. We initialize it with a value of 1. Then, we enter our while loop, which checks to see if the value, inside of the number of hello variable, is less than the parameter number of people that the function received. If that comparison evaluates to true, then the code inside the while block is executed. Pass a value of 5 as a parameter to this function, which means the number of people is now equal to 5. In the first pass through the loop, number of hello is equal to 1. The number of people is now equal to 5. So the comparison 1 smaller than or equal to 5 would be true. And we then enter the body of the loop. In the body, we first print a message, indicating that we finish greeting, followed by the number of hello we had. And then we increase the value of number of hello by 1. To increment the number, we use the plus equal expression. It is a shorthand version of number of hello equals number of hello plus 1. You can use either expression since they both mean the same thing. The process continues until the result of the comparison is not true anymore, which happens when number of hello is bigger than number of people. In our current example, this would be when the value of number of hello is 6. The computer will exit the loop and execute the next line of code. Print out the sentence, finish greeting everyone. We already saw how we can use the simple conditions of a number being smaller than another number in our while loop. These are common conditions, but there are more conditions you can have in while loop. For example, it does not matter if this is done by using comparison operators, or calling additional functions, or even using the logical operators, as long as the result evaluates to true or false. This lets us combine the values of several expressions to get the result we want. Let's try this out. It is common to call a separate function that evaluates the condition to true or false. Let's go through this line by line. We have a new function here. This is the input function, which is a Python built-in function that allows user to input. The input function reads the user input, converts into a string, and returns it. Another function is validate_password function, that validates whether the password is correct or not. As you can see, you can pack a lot of punch into just a short line of code. In this case, the body of the while loop will be executed until the user enters a valid password, which is happy coding. The important thing to remember is that the condition used by the while loop needs to evaluate to true or false. Now, let's run this code. For this example, because we use the input function, we need to run our code from the terminal. If you don't remember how to run code from your terminal, make sure to check the guidance we put below this video. Let's pretend to type in the wrong password. You can see that as long as we type in the wrong password, this condition will always evaluate to true, and the while block will be executed. Now when we type in the correct password, this condition now evaluates to false, and the computer exits the loop. Print out the next line of code. We have covered what a while loop is, as well as learned its syntax and basic behavior. Some of this stuff can be a bit tricky, but you are doing great. Keep sticking with it. Now that you've got an idea of how a while loop works, let's make sure you avoid some of the most common mistakes when writing while loops, which are forgetting to initialize variables with the right value, and forgetting to change the while condition, which causes the condition always evaluates to true, and making the loop runs forever. Let's look into the first mistake, which is forgetting to initialize variables with the right value. We've all made this mistake when starting to code. When we forget to initialize the variable, two different things can happen. The first possible outcome, and the easiest to catch, is that Python will raise an error, telling us that we are using a variable we haven't defined. Which looks like this. This error type is a name error, and the message that comes after it says, we are using an undefined variable. It is straightforward to fix, we just need to initialize the variable before using it. Like this. Now, there is a second issue we might face, if we forget to initialize variables with the right value. We might have already used the variable in our program. In this case, we have two different cities, New York and London. We want to calculate the gap between two areas within each city. Even though these four areas are completely different. If we reuse the variable, without setting the correct value from the start, it will still have the value from before. Check out the script. Can you spot the problem? In the first block, we correctly initialize Area 1 and Area 2 in New York City, and then iterate until there is no gap between Area 1 and Area 2. In the second part of the code, the intention is the same for two areas in London City. But if you look closely, you can see that we are initializing Area 1 but forgetting to initialize Area 2. So Area 2 of London is taking the value from Area 2 of New York City. In this case, it might be harder to catch the problem because Python doesn't raise an error. The problem here is that the Area 2 variable of London City has the wrong value. To fix this, we need to initialize Area 2 of London before starting the second loop. So, to avoid making these mistakes, whenever you're writing a loop, check that you are initializing all the variables you want to use, before you use them. For the second mistake, because while loops use the condition to check when to exit, the body of the while loop needs to make sure that the condition will change. If it doesn't change, the loop may never finish, and we get what's called an infinite loop. A loop that keeps executing and never stops. Let's look at our previous example. What if we remove the line area plus equal 1? If that happens, the condition will always evaluate to true, because 22 is always less than 25. And there is nothing happen that can make this condition false. The program would be stuck in an infinite loop. To break the loop immediately, press Ctrl plus C. To avoid this infinite loop to happen in the first place, there are two things you can do. We need to think about what needs to happen for a loop to be successful. In this example, we want the area 1, at some point, needs to be equal or greater than the area 2. That's why having this line of code to increment the area 1 is very important. Let's take a look at some other methods to avoid infinite loop. Check out this example. This cycle will finish for positive and negative values of number. But what would happen if number was 0? The remainder of 0 divided by 2 is 0, so the condition would be true. The result of dividing 0 by 2 would also be 0, so the value of number wouldn't change. This loop would go on forever. To avoid this, number needs to be different than 0. So we could nest this while loop inside an if statement just like this. With this approach, the while loop is executed only when number is not 0. Alternatively, we could add the condition directly to the loop, using a logical operator. Like this. In Python, we can also use the break keyword, which you can see here, to signal that the current loop should stop running. So quick refresh. There are 3 ways to break the infinite loop. Press Ctrl C if you accidentally execute an infinite loop. Otherwise, making sure the condition is not forever true, to avoid the infinite loop in the first place. Finally, having a break keyword inside your code. And, how do you avoid the most common pitfalls when writing while loops? First, remember to initialize your variables. And second, check that your loops won't run forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and comment if you find this video useful. And subscribe for more future videos.